Okay, bringing us home today, we have Cauldron Energy, and presenting today for Cauldron Energy is their CEO, Jonathan Fisher, better known to many as Jono. Jono, welcome, and over to you.
Okay, guys, a bit of a change in pace. I'm here to talk about uranium and nuclear. Now, what I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the industry and a lot of policy stuff, which there's a lot going on federally with the Liberal Party and also at a state base in WA. And a little call out here, I would encourage you to, not sure about the age of this group, but follow me on Twitter if you're on Twitter. I'm now the leading uranium account in Australia about policy and the market. Now, the reason it's interesting for an investor is because what that does is drive a lot of eyes to the stock. And we're now the leading uranium stock on the ASX, the junior for liquidity. And you do that by a number of things, including having a bit of humour, making some engaging content. That screen's not so great, but that is that's a picture of the Aussie classic, the castle. So I'm used to actually spending a lot of time talking about at uranium forums, so I usually don't go into the bull market for uranium because everyone kind of knows that, but I will today, so we'll speak a bit about that. Cauldron has an absolutely cracking uranium project in WA. The IRR on our project at today's prices would be over 100%. We are, however, constrained with a current uranium mining ban in WA. WA is the world's leading jurisdiction for mining. It's just not for uranium right now. So that's why I'll speak a bit about policy there. And we've actually just released some initial drill results in a polymetallic nickel PGE's project, kind of near the Chalice project in WA. Again, really interesting. Not so interesting for investors right now, so it's not going to be a focus. And just to highlight, we are well funded. I actually just did a placement at a premium, at 11% premium to the market a few weeks ago. So 11% premium, zero broker fees. It was a fantastic outcome for investors. Really, really well supported by the market. This major shareholder, he approached us about 6 months ago, and he said, look, you know, I've identified you as the next Boss Energy. So Boss is the market darling of uranium on the ASX. And he says, and his thesis is the same as mine, the policy in WA changes. There is no doubt about it. The question is how long it takes. He's a money multiple investor, and basically when it changes, and in the lead up to it, there's 10 times on our share price on that change. And so he's happy to continue funding, and he's just demonstrated that with a placement at a premium to the market. So look, we don't need to, some pretty pictures of the team. What is interesting here, I started here, had about 6 months of cleaning up stuff because we were a bit of a recap essentially, a special situation. I started marketing the business here. And so you'll see when investors have understood how bloody good our uranium project is, we've traded pretty strongly. But that's just getting back to where we perhaps should have been. Plenty of growth to go. All right, now we'll get into it. So there are two separate issues in Australia. One is, can we dig out uranium, put it on a ship, and sell it to the US, EU, China? So that's a state issue, WA, where there's a current ban. The separate issue is, do we want to build reactors in Australia? This is Mr. Dutton's issue around the future generation mix. They're separate issues, and I kind of wish actually that Mr. Dutton hadn't been talking about this while I'm talking about that, because investors do get confused, right? Here, uranium mining, you don't have to worry about nuclear waste or anything like that. That is not an issue. We dig it up and we sell it to someone who wants it overseas. Nuclear generation is a more emotive issue for the community. I absolutely believe it's the right policy. It just does create a little bit of confusion that requires explanation. But I'm going to get onto that. So I'm going to spend most of my time talking about uranium. You won't be able to see this. Everyone, you cannot have avoided seeing Mr. Dutton go up against Mr. Bowen and Mr. Albanese around renewables. And our fantastic climate and energy minister, who I'll just remind everyone does not have a technical degree at all, thinks he knows more than the United Nations with respect to nuclear energy. So the UN says we will not hit net zero without nuclear. Mr. Bowen says it doesn't work. So he relies on the CSIRO, though, who have done a report called GenCost, and that is a report that is meant to model up all these different types of generation. The thing is, I'm a financial genius. I can make a financial model say whatever I want. It depends on the assumptions you put into it. And I actually did have a term here at the top of the ASX made me take it out because I said shit in, shit out. If you put shit assumptions into a model, you're going to get shit out of it. So Mr. Bowen probably hasn't looked at this. This is about page 1,000 of the report, but this is some key assumptions. I know you can't see them, but I'm going to run you through them. The cost of nuclear is contentious, and it's something that, you know, there is work to be done on. But they've decided to use $31,000 a kilowatt, moving down to about $16,000 a kilowatt. In comparison, you can deliver nuclear today, and they've just done it at about 7,500 Aussie dollars a kilowatt. So, number one, pretty harsh assumptions on CapEx. But this is the more interesting one. They assume a nuclear reactor lasts for 30 years, and that's it, then you have to replace it. So, nuclear reactors built today have a design life of 70 years to go to 100. And nuclear reactors built 50 years ago are being life extended to 70. So 30 years for a reactor is a bit ridiculous. What's more ridiculous is that they assume your solar panels last for 30 years too. Now, anyone who knows anything about the solar panels industry, you're not going to get 30 years out of that, and you certainly won't be getting 25 years out of an offshore wind farm. However, by putting very, very harsh assumptions on nuclear, very generous assumptions here, harsh here, generous here, and very, very, very harsh assumption of only 53% capacity to a nuclear plant, you can make numbers say renewables are cheaper, especially when you talk about firming. So everyone knows the sun only shines during the day. What do? We need to store it to get it to the night. And that's called storage. So the AEMO, that's our market operator, assumes that we build a lot of storage, 55 gigawatts, of which there's a 37 gigawatt component. The biggest bit is called coordinated CR. What this assumes is that almost every single household in Australia will buy a Tesla wall, and you will allow the network access to your Tesla wall anytime they want it. Secondly, 95% of cars in Australia will be electric, and you as consumers will change your driving patterns to allow the network to suck back power from your electric car when they want it, right? Now, this stuff can happen, but they assume it happens with perfect synchronicity. So consumers change their patterns to suit the network. The other thing, though, is that they assume that so a Tesla Powerwall costs about 15 grand. They assume the consumer pays for that, right? So when Mr. Bowen says renewables are cheaper, it's because the consumer pays for all the storage. And so what consumers usually do is they'll actually finance it because it's expensive. It's 15 grand versus a power bill that's about $1,500 average in New South Wales. They'll finance it probably through their power company. So you'll have your connection fee, you'll actually have your energy usage fee, and you actually have your battery financing fee. And then, you know, what you do is you add up all three, divide by the amount of power you get, and there's your power cost. But what Mr. Bowen says is, no, you don't get to do that. The consumers are going to buy these anyway, so we don't have to worry about counting those in the cost of storage. That's why you can say renewables cheaper. Now, obviously, if you have more base load, you need less storage, clearly. And when you play around with all those assumptions, nuclear is actually very competitive. The other thing to note is when we're talking about net zero and decarbonisation, we should be saying decarbonisation of the energy grid, not the electricity system. When we talk about energy in Australia, this bit's electricity. Right? This bit is basically diesel for fuel transport, and this is heat. So the industry needs some electricity. We go over here. Industry needs some electricity here, but it needs heat to make industrial processes work. And anyone who knows I actually unfortunately have one. If you have an electric hot water system, you understand how much your hot water costs. It's extremely expensive. Industry cannot be internationally competitive if it's relying on electricity to deliver heat. Not only that, actually it won't deliver, that says 600 degrees. It won't deliver very, very, very hot industrial heat. So the only way you can decarbonise that is, if you're lucky, to have geothermal power. Well, we don't have that. Or you have nuclear. And so the reason that the AWU, which is the Australian Workers' Union, represents manufacturing workers in Australia, the AWU is pro-nuclear despite Labor's anti-nuclear stance, is because they're worried that Australia is going to be the only G20 country that does not have nuclear baseload capacity to support its manufacturing industry. Right, so the Labor government might not, and look, I'm not saying vote Liberal. All I am saying, energy modelling is very complicated. There are certainly two ways. You know, Mr. Dutton's view of the world is reasonable. Mr. Bowen's is somewhat tortured, but it is going to be a contentious issue. Energy policy will be a key point in the election. So look, whether we build reactors in Australia, who knows? The rest of the world's building them. The rest of the world is going gangbusters. So a massive nuclear renaissance has occurred because of net zero. It used to be the case that the nuclear was, I've got a background in the nuclear industry, you know, nuclear used to be the bad boy, now it is green, and countries are absolutely pressing ahead with nuclear new build. Just recently there was COP28 in the UAE, triple nuclear pledge. We need more uranium. There is not enough uranium in the world. What people don't understand is even today, under the current nuclear environment, as primary producers, we cannot satisfy the uranium market. Basically, we can do about 75% of it. The rest of it comes from something called megatons to megawatts, so basically disassembling nuclear weapons and down-blending them and putting them in civilian nuclear reactors. That kind of source has actually dried up because unfortunately in the world we're at today, people are building more nuclear weapons, not less. And then there are some commercial stockpiles that were left over from overproduction in the 1960s and 70s. So that is making it, so this is the mid case. The actual current case is sort of up here. There is just not enough uranium to be mined, and people are desperate for it to come from politically aligned jurisdictions because we don't want to. The world right now relies on Russian and Kazakhstani uranium, and that's a real problem. So our trading partners are desperately calling out for uranium from geopolitically aligned nations. Canada, they're trying to do some domestic production out of the US. That is tricky. Australia are the two big issues. And for Australia, we are, I don't know if you can read this, Australia has the world's largest resources of uranium. So just like iron ore, we are blessed. We've got an absolute truckload of uranium. We don't produce enough of it. We do produce it in South Australia. It's been produced there for 40 years without problem. It's never been produced in WA. So the reason for that is because WA is frankly so blessed in every other commodity. They've had a cracking run at it. Iron ore has gone through the roof. Mining has boomed. They kind of haven't had to worry about it. So previously you were able to mine it in WA, this never did, and the uranium price was a bit low. What happened in 2017 is State Daddy Mark McGowan, the guy that shut the borders, came to power, and as a bit of a nod to the left of the party, he banned uranium. He did two things. He banned uranium and he banned exported gas. So the Labor Party was obviously worried about the whole concept of, traditional Labor base voting to Greens, so they made these policies to make it more attractive to the left. And that worked for 7 years, right? Because there was, at that time, the uranium price was low, so he could make this big ideological statement and say, hey, we're banning uranium, and have no real cost to it. Secondly, mining was absolutely booming in WA, so there was no job issues there because everyone could get a job. So what happens today? Well, all these things have changed. So the WA mining sector is under a lot of pressure. I don't know if you guys are as sort of up on the mining trends as my usual crowds, but nickel is under significant stress. You are having thousands of job losses in nickel. Lithium's trading sideways, not looking good. And the golden goose of iron ore in WA is actually about to be killed. There is a project now underway in Guinea in Africa. It's called Simandou. Simandou is, the nickname of Simandou is the Pilbara Killer, because it has the world's largest and highest grade deposit. It will not reduce necessarily production out of WA, it will a little bit, but what it will do is push all these other high cost producers out of the market, and that'll drop the marginal cost of iron ore, that will drop the price from what has been 150 bucks a tonne down to like 60, which craters the royalties the WA government receives. So there are all these first in a generation industry headwinds that WA is now contending with, and they go, there's a brand new, very profitable uranium industry about to be able to be kicked off. The second, so I'm basically the public face of changing this policy. That is the jobs issue we talk about, and diversifying from iron ore and nickel and lithium. The second thing is interesting. I'm sorry, the screen's not great. I mentioned that when McGowan came to power in 2017, he also banned gas exports. Now, since then, Mr. McGowan left power, if you recall, under very strange circumstances, a lot of innuendo about that. A new chap came in, Roger Cook. He's actually making some changes. He is changing the gas ban. So the same time as the uranium ban came on, gas ban came on, he's changing that gas ban now. His argument for that is WA has a moral obligation to help our trading partners decarbonise. We sell more gas, so Indonesia and India burn less coal. Good for net zero. That's his argument. That kind of works. You know, coal for gas, you'll save about 50% of emissions. But it's interesting because that is the argument we use for uranium. We have a moral obligation to help our trading partners who are desperate for our uranium. We should sell it to them because they need it to hit their net zero. Even if Australia doesn't want to build nuclear reactors, everyone else around the world does. And in terms of abatement of carbon, uranium for coal, as opposed to gas for coal, is like 50 times better. So it is an absolute no-brainer. And as I said, as this momentum changes, there is an extraordinary amount of value in our share price. So I am at the forefront of all this. I actually write a lot of media. The reason I do that is because as a junior, I want to be putting my limited funding into the ground. I want to spend it on drilling. I don't want to spend it on PR and paid media. So I write articles, they go in the paper, and then people come to our website or our Twitter accounts or whatever it is, and they look at Cauldron. So it's basically free. So lots of pretty pictures, pretty active. And this culminated last week and a half. The Liberals have finally come out in WA and said they will change this ban if they get elected. Now, they're coming from a long way back. So I'm not saying they're going to win the next election, but bear with me. The Liberals were already well known to be pro-uranium. Their question was, do we make a big election issue out of this? Are there votes? And so what we've managed to say as an industry is, bloody hell, there are absolutely votes. So the Liberals leader is a lady named Libby Mettam, made a policy speech. Within an hour, the Minerals Council of Australia, the peak industry body, came out in support. Within 2 hours, the other main industry body comes out. And then the next day, the Chamber of Commerce produces a front page of the paper. So the West Australian is like the Sydney Morning Herald, except there's no other competitor to it, so it is absolutely the main newspaper in WA. Comes out, big story, $1 billion a year, plus 9,000 jobs that the state is missing out on. The reason the 9,000 jobs is really interesting is because if BHP shuts Nickel West in the next few weeks, there's about 10,000 jobs go. So the fact is we've now got costings from the chamber saying actually all those jobs can be redistributed into the uranium industry. So fantastic support from all the industry groups. Editorials, again, this is from the West, saying actually, WA is just shooting itself in the foot with this uranium ban. So what does the public think about this? WA is a mining state. We're the best in the world at it. So this should not surprise you, actually, that the public doesn't care about this ban. Actually, the public want the ban lifted. So this polling was done, I sit on the Uranium Forum for the Minerals Council. This is actually broken down by voter intentions. And it shows that the majority of Liberal voters want policy change. That's not a surprise. Majority of Labor voters want the policy changed, right? They want jobs. What's really interesting is 34% of Greens voters want the policy changed. And that suggests you've got this movement of eco-modernism sort of emerging in Australia. That is a movement that's emerged over in Europe and in Canada, where they say, look, the real enemy is carbon itself, and technology can play a role in reducing that, as opposed to the Greens that we might all be used to as sort of tree huggers. So 34% of Greens, and funnily enough, 80% of One Nation voters are pro-uranium. Now, that's a little bit interesting, because if there's a protest vote, and you've seen it sort of in Queensland and you see it in WA, if there's a protest vote against the government, it goes right, it goes to One Nation. So the public generally is supportive. This is nuclear energy. Nuclear submarines. Perth is going to be the first place to host a nuclear sub. And that's going to happen in 2027. So right now in WA, you have a state government saying, we're so excited to have nuclear submarines, they're going to generate all these jobs, it's great. And we're going to actually handle nuclear waste from those submarines, and there's a nuclear waste repository being built in suburban Perth. Yet we can't justify mining the dilute raw material because it's unsafe. It's a logical fallacy, and at least that means that the policy will change. The question is how long it takes, and when it does change, as I said, fantastic value for us. When you listen to the green groups, and I know I'm getting under their skin because they're getting much more active, and you're seeing it in social media. They basically say that we can't do this. WA doesn't know how to do this. We can't handle radiation. It's absolute crock. So first of all, you look at South Australia. Olympic Dam is one of the largest producers of uranium in the world, and Honeymoon Well is actually literally about to produce its first pound of yellow cake this month. So they're recommissioning. Fantastic. I've spoken to the South Australian government. I've said, hey, would you mind hosting a delegation of Western Australian government bureaucracy so you can show them how it's done? They love the idea, because it's not often that South Australia gets one up over WA. So they're very, very keen to do that. The second thing is, even in WA, look, we handle radiation all the time. We handle radiation in our mineral sands, in our oil and gas industry. Unlike eastern states' mineral sands, which are up the coast on the Sand Islands, WA's mineral sands are actually way more radioactive than yours. I've got a lot more monazite in it. So basically what happens in the mining stream is all that radiation goes into the tailings, and so you're handling it there in your waste stream. In a uranium mine, we want the radiation, right? We're digging it up, we're selling the radiation overseas. So the radiation in the waste streams for a uranium mine are pretty benign. The other thing to note is this wonderful facility here. This is Australia's first radioactive waste, commercially operated radioactive waste repository. It's operational, it's in WA. And I know this because I was the one that founded that. I was the founding CFO of that. I did the government approvals for that. I financed it and built it. It is a absolutely world-class facility. This takes radioactive waste from all across Australia at the moment, as well as chemical hazardous waste. And so, most of the stuff from a uranium mine is just a mine's tailing stream. It's not particularly radioactive at all, lower than background. It'll go back into the ground. Sometimes your equipment, when you've been processing it over 30 years, it does build up a little residual radiation like it does in oil and gas and mining and mineral sands, and that can go into this facility. So already built, already operating. And then the final point is, well, we're going to have nuclear submarines in like 2.5 years in Perth, with all the nuclear and radiation safety industry that pops up around that. It just sort of suggests that the fact that you can't mine a small amount of low-level radioactive material is kind of ridiculous. So the reason this is interesting is it diversifies the state. It is a benefit to the state, and it helps the world decarbonise. So that's my industry stuff. Now getting onto Cauldron. Why do you want to invest in Cauldron? Because we have the most ripper of a uranium project. So when this policy changes, we will be amongst the lowest cost producers in the world. And because we do something called in situ recovery, we have very low capex. So that means we don't dig a hole, we don't crush material, we don't beneficiate material, and we don't need a big power station to do that. We drill a hole, we put some fluid down there, let it percolate for a little while and suck it back up. And that is exactly the way that the Honeymoon project in South Australia, the one that I mentioned, is just about to start back up production. That does it. Now, because you have such low capex, you have a ridiculous IRR. So this is 79% at $75 a pound. At today's price of $90 a pound, it's about 100% IRR. And last week, after the Liberals put forward their policy platform and said they would overturn the policy, the WA Premier came out in response and said, this is really interesting, he said, don't get distracted, it's just a distraction by the Liberal Party, the uranium industry in WA will not be profitable until uranium price gets to $130 a pound. This was a very sensationalist headline there from the West Australian. All I simply said to the Premier is you've been misinformed by your advisors, and if you are using that incorrect information to propagate a ridiculous policy, you really should know the correct information. So at the Premier's suggestion of $130 a pound, our IRR would be over 200%. Just completely unheard of. So all of this, the economics are pushing for a change of policy. The politics around net zero and transition, they're all pushing for a change of policy. So what do we do to maximise our value? And we drill. We drill. We have a huge resource already. It's 31 million pounds. And that's the things that underpins the scoping study I just put forward on the other page. We are going out, we have an exploration target of another 50 up to maybe 70 million pounds to get to this magical 100 million pound number. And we are out drilling in about 4 to 5 weeks to test that. It is in a very flat, frankly boring bit of WA. It is a sediment hosted, so it's very cheap to drill. I can drill 25,000 metres for $2.5 million. It is absolutely brilliant to drill, and we are going out there and we are banking pounds to the balance sheet, because the more uranium we have in our balance sheet as the momentum builds towards this change of policy, is the more valuable we will be, and we will get taken out for a quite substantial premium. Because of the quality of the project, we can't help but be extremely attractive to uranium majors who are looking for uranium from first world countries. So this might bore people, but this is our existing deposit. It is open in every direction. This is one of 20 targets that we have in our roughly 1,000 square kilometres of land. There is a lot of uranium there. And we are testing. So basically what we're doing is, this is a plan view of the other map. We've got lots of different places to drill. We are spending money doing it. We're funded to do that. And you will see, as we are out drilling, that will actually go through into the share price. What's interesting, the hardest thing to do right now in WA is to recommission the camp. So, say, go back a couple of years ago, you could not get a drill rig for love nor money because everyone was drilling, exploration was going gangbusters. What I said earlier was that actually nickel was kind of in real problematic space, as is lithium at the moment, and iron ore is not looking much better. So exploration drill rigs, I could get one out tomorrow. So the reason I say we'll be drilling in 4 to 5, maybe 6 weeks is we're lucky we've already got a camp here. I've just got to recommission it. So I have to get the plumbing redone, get a new generator, and buy some new sheets and pillows. And that's the hard bit, funnily enough. So we'll have, this is our base of operations. It's really good that we've got that there because it is in kind of the middle of nowhere. So having a camp already established means we can get on site quickly. Just briefly, we also did report some drill results from Melrose. So what you can't see here is we've sort of delineated this blob. There's a 3D model of a blob here. It sits at about 100 metres depth. And there were some historic holes that went down to about 50 metres. So they didn't go into the blob. I'm trying to explain this in layman's terms. So what we've just done is a bit more shallow drilling. And it was interesting because even in the shallow drilling, The previous results got 0.47% nickel. Well, we have just reported the initial results, and we're seeing about 1% nickel, even in the and some platinoids and other sort of bits and pieces that might be interesting actually. So some polymetallic thing, even in this top weathered zone. So that was only down to roughly 50 metres. So what we have now gone back and done is we've put some holes into this, what is grey, the deeper thing down to about 200 metres. And those results are about 3 weeks off being reported from the labs. So stay tuned for that. We don't intend to be a polymetallic nickel platinum company. We are a uranium company. But there are already nickel majors sniffing around and asking to do farm-ins on that. Now the reason that's interesting is because I can get a few million bucks. They can go and do what they want to do. They give me a few million bucks and I can go and drill more uranium and I don't have to do a capital raise. So again, great for shareholders. Here's some pretty pictures. This is the largest EM rig you can get. It's massive. It's like 35 metres across. You won't be able to see here, but here's our Cauldron logo. All about branding. This is one of these logos that you get, and when you get a hire car, you can get a magnetic logo, and you stick it on the thing, so it looks like you've got your own vehicles. And I was like, oh guys, can I put my logo on the chopper, just so I can get a shot of it? And he's like, yeah, Jono, that's fine, but that chopper's made of aluminium, so it ain't going to stick. So that's blue tacked on. I wasn't allowed to fly with it on, but it was good for a photo. And then here's some examples of the rig spinning. That's the RC rig. So in terms of what do you want to see from a junior, you want to see when we raise money, we minimise corporate overheads and we put money into the ground. So, I spend a lot of time back in Perth, fly economy. I stay with my parents in Perth so I don't cost the company money. We put our money into the ground, and I said I do a lot of media and public profile stuff to make sure people know about the company without having to pay for it. So we are drilling. We've just finished our second round of drilling actually at Melrose. We are drilling at Yanrey, which will be 25,000. Possibly we'll get a second rig out there and do 50,000 metres. And actually we are also looking for some more uranium land, either in WA or in possibly South Australia, to really just leverage up the exposure to uranium. Because it is, I actually didn't put the uranium price graph in here. We are in a 10 to 20 year absolute shortage in uranium. It is a bull market for uranium that the likes of which have never been seen. So we are very, very, very excited about the next 6 months for our drill campaign. If it takes me 6 months, it takes me a year, 2 years to change the policy to mining. We're actually not constrained by the current ban because we can continue developing our project. We just can't mine it, but I can do all the feasibilities and all the rest of the drilling and everything else I need to do. So it is going to be a very, very interesting few years. So I think with that, Paul, I think that's my last slide. It is. And then some ASX compliance and disclaimer stuff, which you'll all have read.
Thanks, Jono. That's very, very impressive. So in 25 minutes there, you've got a real understanding what's going on in the world of uranium at the moment. Any questions from the floor at this stage?
Yeah, I commend you on your move to try and get the uranium policy changed in Australia. And just a comment, then a question. Albanese is my local member. Plittacet is very, very extreme left, and if you look at their left, the members of the Labor Party in their electorate are even further left.
Yep.
They're also under threat from the Greens.
Yep.
So you're dealing with this entrenched and sort of view on life that this is like the Voice. We'd
Yep.
rather lose than modify it together.
Yep.
So be aware of that when you're dealing with the
Yep.
federal MPs. It's loopy country as far as I'm concerned. The question is, if you were to compare the resources you have to the costs of developing, extracting uranium to save cost, how would you compare?
So, just on the politician's point, so federally, that's nuclear energy and building reactors, right? The ban I need to overturn is a state-based uranium ban.
But can the federals block it
No.
as well?
No. Yes, you need a federal approval from ASNO, which is our Safeguards and Anti-Proliferation Agency, but that's not a problem. ASNO gives you those. So the issue is WA state-based policy, and that is why I focus on that, because federally it is a bit trickier. But I always have a bit of fun with Mr. Bowen and pushing his buttons. And what I'll say there is Australians generally, as a whole holistic statement, don't like big ideological statements either way, right? It kind of doesn't sell well to the electorate. So what Mr. Bowen does is tries to dress up that nuclear issue in economics or some other matter without saying, oh, it's an ideological issue, when it in fact is. But yes, so state-based for us, not federally. In terms of BOS, yes, we are basically, this is really interesting. I'm not allowed to put up on the ASX a side-by-side of us and BOS. ASX doesn't let you do that. But I've got a slide, but I just can't do it. I say, so our new major shareholder approached me and said, hey, John, I think you're the next boss. And I'm like, I agree. So they're both ISR assets. They're both about the same size in terms of amount of uranium. We're both at about between 80 and 100 metres deep. So a lot of similarities. The difference is that Duncan, CEO of BOS, is in South Australia. He can mine. He's been able to build. So he's capped at about $30 a pound of uranium in ground. And he'll sell that for 100, and there's good margin there, right? We're capped at about $1.20 per pound of uranium in ground. Now, yes, I'm going to have to spend $100 million to build the damn thing, but that differential from, well, I say quite openly, there's 10 times on a share price. When you look at the valuation per pound of uranium, $1.20 versus 30, even if you put in there a capital raise and a bit more exploration money, you can see where that value arbitrage can be. And in terms of OPEX, very similar. So we have slightly better permeability than Honeymoon. They've got a bit more grade. So things wash out in terms of OPEX.
Why is the CSIRO using dodgy figures?
So yeah, there's a couple of thoughts on that. One is, they're not power system experts. So don't get a PhD to do a financial model, right? And the secondly, look, there has been some question about, it's not necessarily the CSIRO's fault on some things because of the way the terms of reference work. So actually, GenCost, which was that model I showed you, wasn't necessarily built for the purpose that Mr. Bowen is trying to use it for to justify the renewables only thing. Yeah, but it's disappointing. And there has been a lot in the media and a few of us working just to hold GenCost, CSIRO and AMO to account, because AMO says, the storage costs are included in the model. And I'm like, they might be included, but they're included at zero. And so, they weren't technically lying, but they were kind of being misleading.
Please.
Just on energy growth and nuclear, can you touch on the growth in AI and what it means for energy growth? Because obviously Amazon bought a data center powered by nuclear.
Yep.
So how important it is for...
So again, one of the arguments against renewables and for nuclear is energy density, and the energy density within nuclear, but also there's the amount of energy that AI is going to need. After Google, obviously, Bill Gates has just kicked off with TerraPower the commencement of his first nuclear plant. It's a molten salt reactor. And guess where he's building it? He's building it next to a coal plant. So one of the things that the Liberals have been pushing and Labor has been pushing back on is this whole coal to nuclear substitution doesn't work. Well, it's actually happening in the US. And you do that because A, there's existing infrastructure there and transmission lines. And secondly, it might seem odd, but there's a lot of jobs substitution from a coal plant into a nuclear plant, because essentially they're all just big kettles, right? We boil water to make electricity. And so the thermal part of the jobs, there's a huge amount of jobs crossover that you can get there. So yeah, AI is a lot of AI in the future will not be able to get the density of energy they need or the reliability of it without having a nuclear plant there.
So just a second part of that. Is there a worry that Australia might be left behind the rest of the world moving towards AI and so forth and data centers, and we just can't?
I think there's a worry. In my view, it's broader than AI, and as I said, it's the reason that the main union for the manufacturing industry is pro-nuclear is if every other member of the G20 has baseload nuclear power and we don't, we can have as much sunshine as you want and as much wind as you want, but the firming capacity to make it all work properly is just so extraordinarily expensive that you'll be better off. All those guys building nuclear plants will outcompete us every day.
Just a small correction. You said, I think I got it. I heard that they're going to take the power, okay, from the battery back into the network.
Yeah.
They're doing it now.
Yep.
They're doing it now.
Yep.
Otherwise, you've got a system, okay, and you're surprised, okay, he wasn't told about this. So they're actually taking the power out of the battery at 7 cents, say, okay?
Yeah, so they do.
And then when the next day, when he needs the power, he's got to pay 45 cents. Can you imagine? It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, so this kind of stuff can work. All I'm saying on that point is you should at least cost it into the overall system, because what the consumer cares about is what are the overall costs they're going to pay to have their reliable power. And this is what Mr. Dutton is saying. You have to include all of that, because if that's what I care about trying to run my household budget. The second thing is when you look at that, you go, when you do that kind of stuff, it actually really screws with the useful life of your battery when you're constantly pulling it out down and like that, and they don't give you any compensation.
Of all running these power lines, you look at $1 trillion overall cost.
Sorry?
To run all this overhead.
Oh, the transmission lines.
Transmission lines, yes.
Yeah.
We're talking, that's just astronomical.
Yeah, and the way that GenCost does that is really tricky because they assume they're already built.
Yeah.
So they cost zero.
Yeah, right.
So that's a nice one again. Good assumption.
Yeah, it's this issue of trillions of dollars on transmission lines occurred to me. What if the government and this is devil's advocate, what if the government subsidised household solar and apartment solar and community batteries and didn't have to build those $1 trillion transmission lines to the major cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane?
Yeah. So they do subsidise.
I know,
solar.
but if they subsidise it more, would they save money on these?
Oh, I'm assuming you'd save money on transmission.
They wouldn't have to bring the power
But the costs of battery storage on a per megawatt hour basis are extraordinary.
Even a community
battery, you can't, there may well be a step change in technology 10 years out that we don't know about that is going to make, the costs of storing electrons competitive to baseload generation, but just nowhere near. All we're saying on that point is just cost all those subsidies or anything else, cost it in and lay it out and apples for apples comparison. All we ask.
Just conscious of time, Jono will be here over lunch, so please, I know there's a lot more questions. I need to finish with the last question. And Jono, look, it's no doubt that you're at the forefront of what's going on with nuclear energy and been speaking with the government. So come on, I'm going to put you on the spot. How close are we to seeing a shift in policy from WA?
Oh, all right. There are 3 pathways, right? So the end game is the same. This damn policy changes, and anyone you talk to, other than the very left of the greenies, the tree hugger greenies, not the eco-modernists, everyone else agrees except for those guys. So the first pathway is the Liberals win the next election. They'll have to do like a absolute heroic effort to do that. That's probably not your base case. Stuff gets so bad in the WA mining industry before the election. So if BHP closes Nickel West in 4 weeks, we've just had another couple hundred jobs lost in the lithium sector down at Kemerton by Albemarle. So if that happens and then Simandou comes online and they can see the impact on the forward curve of the iron ore price, that might force the government to have this argument. So the government the Labor government says they've got their lefties that they don't want to lose, but the bigger part of their party sits on the right, and they're basically cashed up miners. They have mortgages, they've got hire purchase on a jet ski, and they drive a Ford Ranger, right? Which again is probably financed. They need jobs, and so in that instance, if a massive chunk of their base is going to lose their job, then they will have the argument with their left, because jobs and ideologies, jobs always wins. So that's possible before the election, but again, probably not probable. I don't know that it'll get that bad that quickly. I think it will get bad, but in the next term. And so in the next term, say Labor get back in, but it will be at a much more normal mix of Labor-Liberal. So the interesting thing there is you'll have a Premier who now has a mandate, because right now that new Premier, Roger Cook, hasn't won an election yet. The only way he got to power was when the other guy quit and he did a deal with the unions. So it's entirely reasonable, or it's understandable that right now, he doesn't have much political weight to throw around, but when he wins an election, he may. And he's actually showing that he's quite, I don't want to say too much publicly, he's quite pragmatic. Let's call it that. Yeah.
Jonathan Fisher, many thanks for your time.